The Veth Collective had known fear before. Fear was the cold current that shaped their evolution on the deep-water world of Thalassar. Fear was the shadow in the abyssal trenches where ancient predators still hunted. Fear was the memory of the first surface dwellers who came with fire and steel, only to drown in the crushing depths of their oceans. But this fear was different. This fear had no shape, no pattern, no mercy. It consumed. Commander Xylos of the Veth Defense Fleet watched the tactical display with eyes that had not closed in 3 rotations. The holographic map of their spiral arm flickered with dying lights, system after system, colony after colony, winking out like candles in a hurricane. The swarm had no negotiation, no demands, no interest in surrender. It only ate. "Report," Xylos said, her voice cracking through the bridge's filtered atmosphere. The air was thin here, recycled too many times, carrying the stale tang of fierce sweat and burned circuitry. "Fourth wave is collapsing, Commander," said Tactical Officer Varn, his tendrils twitching with barely contained panic. "They broke through the Minus Station defensive line 17 minutes ago. The station is gone. All hands." Xylos closed her eyes. Minus Station had been their most fortified outpost, 40,000 souls. A generation of military doctrine, hardened by 2 centuries of peacekeeping. Gone. "The evacuation of Veth Prime," she asked. 43% complete. The civilian transports are struggling. The swarm's advanced elements are already in the outer system. We have maybe 6 hours before they reach orbital range. 6 hours. For a civilization that had measured time in the slow rhythms of planetary rotation, 6 hours was nothing. A single breath, a heartbeat. "Broadcast the signal," Xylos said. "Full spectrum, every frequency, every language, every known contact." Varn stared at her. "Commander, we've already sent diplomatic requests to the Federation Council, the Krell Alliance, the Syndicate. They all refused. They said it's too dangerous. They said." "I don't care what they said." Xylos's voice hardened. "Broadcast to everyone, every civilization we've ever contacted, every species we've ever traded with, every world that has ever received our transmissions. Someone must answer. And if no one does?" Xylos turned away from the tactical display. Outside the viewport, Veth Prime hung in the darkness, a jewel of blue and green, its surface covered in the vast oceans that had birthed her people. She could see the lights of cities on the major continents, the glimmer of orbital platforms, the tiny pinpricks of evacuation shuttles fleeing toward the jump points. "Then we die with honor," she said, "but we do not die silently." The broadcast went out. It traveled across light years, compressed into quantum packets, riding the ancient network of relay stations that the Veth had spent centuries building. It carried images of their children, their cities, their history. It carried the weight of a civilization begging for salvation. Most recipients never opened the message. The galaxy was vast and cold, and the swarm was a terror that no one wanted to touch. The Krell Alliance deleted it unread. The Syndicate flagged it as a biohazard risk. The Federation Council sent a politely worded refusal, citing resource constraints and strategic priorities. But the signal traveled further, past the trade routes, past the borders of known space, past the worlds that had dismissed the Veth as a minor aquatic species with nothing to offer but cultural artifacts and deep-water mining rights. It reached a system that most of the galaxy considered a backwater, a system with a single yellow star, and a world that had nearly destroyed itself 3 times before learning to walk among the stars. A species that had clawed its way out of gravity wells and radiation belts, carrying the scars of 100 near extinctions on their fragile bodies. The humans received the transmission 73 hours after it was sent. On a military installation orbiting their 3rd planet, a junior communications officer named Maya Tors watched the message decode. The Veth language was difficult, a complex arrangement of harmonic tones and pressure variations that didn't translate well into human vocal ranges, but the images were unmistakable. "Death, destruction, a plea." She flagged it for her superior, who flagged it for his superior, who flagged it for the Joint Chiefs. Within 6 hours, the message had been viewed by the highest military authority on Earth. And within 24, the answer was already being prepared. Commander Xylos received the human transmission while huddled in the bunker beneath Veth Prime's capital city. The swarm's advance forces were bombarding the orbital defense platforms. The sky outside was a canvas of fire and falling debris. The message came through on a frequency so primitive that her systems almost rejected it. The visual was grainy, the audio distorted by the vast distance and the interference of the battle above. But the words were clear. "We received your message," said the human on the screen. He was male, middle-aged, with a face that had seen too many hard years. His eyes were the color of the deep ocean. "We're sending what we can." Xylos stared at the screen. "How many ships, how many warriors we need?" "We don't have ships," the human said. "Not the kind that can help you. Our fleet is small. Our resources are limited. We're a young species. You probably think we're primitive." Xylos felt her hope collapse. "Then why are you contacting us? Why raise our hopes if you have nothing to offer?" The human smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much and still refused to break. "Because we have something better than ships," he said. "We have a graveyard." Xylos blinked. "A what?" "We bury our dead in space," the human said. "Thousands of years of ships, soldiers, pilots. Some of them are older than your civilization. They're preserved, waiting." "For what?" Xylos whispered. "For a reason to wake up," the human said. "We're sending you the coordinates. Take what you need. But understand this, Commander, these aren't soldiers. These are ghosts, and ghosts don't fight for you." The transmission cut out. Xylos stared at the blank screen, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. A graveyard of preserved soldiers, ghosts that would fight for no one. Then why send them? Outside, the swarm's bombardment intensified. The bunker shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Xylos made a decision. "Plot a course for these coordinates," she said, transmitting the human data to her navigation officer. "We're going to see what Earth has to offer." "Commander." "Silence," she said. "We have nothing left to lose." She didn't know it yet, but Xylos was about to witness something that would change the galaxy forever. She was about to meet the dead. And they were ready to fight. The unlikely answer. The jump to Sol was a desperate gamble. The Veth Scout ship Infinite Current had been stripped of anything unnecessary for speed. Armor plating had been removed. Life support systems were running at minimum. The crew of 43, Xylos' most loyal officers, had volunteered for what they assumed would be a one-way mission. Better to die trying to find salvation than to wait for the swarm to devour them. The ship emerged from quantum space 300,000 kilometers from the system's outer boundary. Xylos stared at the tactical display, her heart sinking. The human system was unremarkable, a yellow star, 8 planets, 3 of which were gas giants, asteroid belts, the usual debris of a spacefaring civilization. But something was wrong. "Commander," Varn said, his voice tight, I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies, debris fields, dense ones. They're scattered throughout the outer system." Xylos leaned forward. "Show me." The tactical display zoomed in. What she saw made her breath catch. The debris fields weren't random. They were organized, structured. Hundreds of thousands of objects drifting in the cold dark, arranged in patterns that spoke of deliberate placement. "Those aren't debris," she said. "Those are ships." But they couldn't be ships. They were too small, too fragile. Many of them looked like they had been cobbled together from salvage, their hulls pitted and scarred from centuries of exposure to cosmic radiation. Some were barely recognizable as vessels at all, more like skeletons, their internal frameworks exposed, their weapon mounts empty and cold. "Are they active?" Varn asked. Xylos checked the readings. No power signatures, no life signs, they're empty." But that wasn't quite true. She could see something, a faint energy signature emanating from each vessel, not the bright hum of active systems, but something softer, a whisper of something that might have once been alive. Communication, she said. Open a channel to the system's central authority. Identify ourselves. The channel opened, static crackled, then a voice, human, female, calm. Veth vessel, this is Sol Station. We received your transmission. Welcome to our home. Xylos suppressed a surge of anger. Your home is under attack. My home is under attack. You said you had something to offer. Where is it? Look around you, the voice said. Xylos looked. I see scrap, I see ruin. What are you trying to show me? The answer to your question, the voice said. Every ship in this system that has ever carried human beings into the dark is here. We collected them. We preserved them. Every hull that survived a battle, every vessel that limped home from a lost frontier, every transport that carried our first colonists to the stars. They're all here. Xylos frowned. You're giving me your museum pieces, your historical artifacts. I need ships that can fight, warriors who can bleed. These ships can fight, the voice said. And as for bleeding, the human laughed, a sound that was more exhaustion than humor. Commander, these ships don't have warriors. They have pilots, gunners, commanders. All of them are preserved, cryostases with full neural mapping and personality backup. They've been waiting for a war that mattered. Xylos felt something cold crawl down her spine. You said they were dead. They are, the voice confirmed. And they're not dead. Human biology is complicated. We learned to separate the mind from the body centuries ago. The bodies are dead, but the minds, a pause, the minds are waiting. Varn grabbed Xylos's arm. Commander, this is madness. We can't trust this. We don't know what they're offering. It could be a trap. It could be. It could be our only chance, Xylos interrupted. We're out of options. We're out of time. She turned back to the display. Take me to the nearest vessel. I want to see what we're dealing with. The infinite current moved deeper into the debris field. As they approached the nearest ship, a battered cruiser that had seen better centuries, Xylos noticed something strange. The vessel's external markings were unfamiliar. Not human, not Veth, not anything she recognized. The language on the hull was ancient, predating most known galactic civilizations. The name, scrawled in fatting paint, was in a script that her translation system struggled with. But it had a translation, last stand. What does that mean? Xylos asked. It means we don't give up, the human voice said. It means that even when we're falling, we still fight. Even when we're dead, we still fight. Xylos ordered a docking procedure. The infinite current connected to the ancient cruiser's airlock. The internal atmosphere was cold, thin, but breathable. The lights flickered, ancient systems struggling to respond to the sudden presence of living visitors. They walked through corridors lined with cryogenic pods. Each pod held a human form, frozen in the moment of death, or something like death. Their faces were peaceful. Their hands were folded across their chests. They looked like statues, waiting for a sculptor to breathe life back into their stone. Xylos stopped at one pod. The figure inside was a woman, her skin weathered by solar radiation, her hair a cascade of gray and silver. She had a scar across her forehead, a mark of violence that had healed but never faded. Her eyes were closed, but Xylos could see something in her expression, a fierceness that hadn't faded even in this half-death. Who is she? Xylos asked. The human voice answered. Her name was Margot Sorensen. She commanded this vessel during the first expansion. She died in a battle that no one remembers against an enemy that no one remembers, but she remembered her duty. She volunteered for preservation, just like all of them. All of them. Every human who ever died in space, the voice said. Every soldier who fell in battle. Every pilot who burned up in atmospheric reentry. Every explorer who drifted into the void. We brought them home. We preserved them, and we waited. Xylos stared at the frozen woman. Waited for what? The human voice grew soft. For someone who needed us. For someone who deserved our help. For someone who proved that they were worth the cost of resurrection. A new voice joined the channel. Male, rough, full of command. Commander Xylos of the Veth, the voice said. I am Admiral Thorn, I speak for the dead. Xylos turned. A hologram flickered to life in the corridor, a human male older than the others, his face lined with decades of service. His uniform was tattered. His eyes were fire. Do you want our help, Commander? Thorn asked. Yes, Xylos breathed. Yes, we do. Then we will come, Thorn said. But understand this. We are not your soldiers. We are not your saviors. We are the ones who never got a chance to finish our fight. We are the ones who promised that if anyone in the galaxy ever needed us, we would rise to answer. Xylos swallowed hard. How many of you are there? Admiral Thorn smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a predator's smile. More than you can count, he said. More than the swarm can eat. We are the graveyard of humanity, and we have been waiting a very long time for a worthy opponent. The pods began to activate. The lights flickered. The temperature rose, and in the frozen silence of the ancient cruiser, the dead began to wake. Xylos stepped back. She had come here for salvation. She had found something else entirely. The fleet that shouldn't exist. The dead did not rise quickly. The resurrection process was careful, methodical, designed to minimize the shock of reanimation. Each pod underwent a sequence of warming protocols, nutrient infusion, neural reactivation, a delicate dance between biology and technology that had taken human scientists centuries to perfect. Xylos watched the first pod open. The woman inside, Margot Sorensen, the scarred commander from the ancient cruiser, opened her eyes. They were pale gray, the color of storm clouds over an angry sea. She blinked once, twice, then focused on Xylos with an intensity that made the Veth commander take an involuntary step backward. Where am I? Margot's voice was rough, unused. Who are you? You're on your ship, Xylos said. The last stand. My name is Xylos, commander of the Veth Defense Fleet. We came to ask for help. Margot sat up slowly, testing her limbs, her movements stiff and mechanical. The scar on her forehead seemed to pulse with a faint light, a mark of the resurrection process that would fade as her body adjusted to its second life. I remember, Margot said. I remember the battle, the enemy, the fire. I remember dying. She looked around the corridor at the rows of still-sealed pods. How long has it been? 200 years, the human voice from Sol Station said. You died in the Battle of Proxima 7. The war ended, but we saved you. We saved all of you. Margot nodded slowly. She didn't seem surprised. We knew there was a chance. The preservation program. I remember volunteering. She looked at Xylos. And you came to wake us because you're losing a war. Xylos hesitated. Yes. Who's the enemy? The swarm, Xylos said. Biomechanical, feeding on organic matter. We can't stop them. Our fleets are gone. Our worlds are falling. We have 6 hours before they reach our homeworld. Margot processed this information with a speed that made Xylos's head spin. She looked at the corridor, at the pods, at the ancient cruiser that had been her tomb and now would be her battlefield. Admiral Thorn, Margot said, where is he? Awakening aboard the flagship, Sol Station reported. He'll be in contact soon, but Margot, you can't do this alone. The swarm is massive. The Veth couldn't fight them. You need the entire fleet. I know, Margot said. That's why we have one. She stood up. Her body creaked, bones cracking after 2 centuries of stillness. But there was a strength in her that hadn't faded, a fire that hadn't been extinguished. Follow me, she said. Xylos followed Margot through the corridors of the last stand. They passed more pods, more frozen faces, more soldiers who had traded death for a second chance. The ship hummed with increasing power, ancient engines warming for the first time in centuries. They reached the bridge. It was a ruin. Control panels were shattered, displays cracked, wiring exposed. But Margot moved through the wreckage with practiced ease, touching consoles that should have been dead, activating systems that shouldn't have functioned. Status, she commanded. 73% of systems functional, a synthesized voice said. Weapons systems offline. Propulsion at 52%. Life support, shields, and navigation operational. 20% of crew pods active. The rest are waiting. Send a signal, Margot said. Transmit to every preserved vessel in the graveyard. Code, final stand. Xylos felt a shiver of unease. What does that mean? It means we're waking everyone, Margot said. Every ship, every soldier, every pilot who ever took an oath to defend humanity. They will respond. Xylos stared at her. That's thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. How can you command them all? Margot smiled. It was a tired smile, worn down by 2 centuries of silence and the weight of a duty that had never ended. Because we made a promise, she said. When we died, we didn't just die. We volunteered for the Resurrection Corps. We agreed to be preserved for future wars, not because we wanted to fight again, but because we wanted to protect the future. To make sure that no one, human or alien, ever had to face annihilation alone. The communications array crackled. Voices began to filter through, crackling, ancient, disoriented, but alive. This is the Valiant, awaiting orders. The relentless reporting, where's the battle? Commander Yamashita here, what in the void is happening? Margot activated the shipwide intercom. This is Captain Sorensen of the Last Stand. All vessels, all personnel. We have been awakened because the Veth Collective has asked for our help. They are facing a threat called the Swarm, a biomechanical enemy that consumes worlds. Their civilization is on the brink of extinction. A pause, then a new voice commanding and familiar. This is Admiral Thorne. I confirm Captain Sorensen's report. We are going to war. All vessels, all personnel report to your deployment stations. The resurrection process will continue as we travel. We have no time to waste. Xylos watched the tactical display. Across the graveyard, lights were beginning to flicker on thousands of them, tens of thousands, a sea of vessels awakening from their long slumber. Some were tiny fighters, barely large enough to hold a single pilot. Others were massive capital ships, designed for planetary bombardment. And all of them were coming here, converging on the Last Stand. How long until we can move? Margot asked. 2 hours, Sol Station reported. The fleet needs time to regenerate, to calibrate systems, to remember how to fight. But after that, a pause. After that, you're going to bring hell to the Swarm. Xylos turned to Margot. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? You didn't even know us. You didn't know the Swarm. You could have stayed in your pods. You could have waited for a war that actually mattered. Margot looked at her. The scar on her forehead seemed to glow brighter in the dim bridge light. Because we made a promise, she said. And promises matter, Commander, especially when they're made by people who know they're never going to break them. A new transmission came through, this one from the Swarm's direction. The image was distorted, fragmented, but Xylos could make out the basic shape of the enemy, a writhing mass of metal and flesh, a thing that had no face, no voice, no soul. Attention Veth, the Swarm's signal rasped. Your worlds are ours, your people are ours, resistance is pointless. Margot looked at the transmission. She didn't flinch, she didn't blink. Attention, Swarm, she said. I'm Captain Margot Sorensen of the Human Resurrection Corps, and I have a message for you. She paused, letting the silence build. You made a mistake. You threatened someone who asked for help, and the humans answered. The tactical display showed the fleet forming up. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands. A graveyard risen from the dead, ready to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Xylos felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hoping. We're coming for you, Margot said, and we won't stop until you're done. The transmission ended. The fleet began to move. And in the darkness of the graveyard, the dead went to war. The awakening. The jump to Veth space took less than 6 hours. Xylos stood on the bridge of the Last Stand, watching the quantum space swirl around them. The human resurrection fleet had transformed into something incredible, a living formation of vessels that should have been scrap, crewed by soldiers who should have been dust. Margot Sorensen stood beside her, her scarred face illuminated by the flickering displays. She was still getting used to the resurrection process. Her movements were occasionally jerky, her eyes sometimes unfocused. But there was a steel in her that Xylos couldn't help but admire. "Your people are remarkable," Xylos said, "to preserve your dead for such a purpose, to believe so strongly in the future that you would sacrifice your rest for strangers." Margot shook her head. "It's not sacrifice, it's hard to explain. We didn't do this because we wanted to fight. We did it because we wanted to matter." Xylos frowned. "Matter?" "When I died, I didn't know if I'd done enough," Margot said. "I'd fought battles, lost friends, watched worlds burn, but I never knew if it made a difference. Preservation gave me a second chance, a chance to finish what I started, to make sure that my death wasn't just another statistic." Xylos understood. She understood more than Margot knew. The quantum field collapsed. The fleet emerged into Veth space. And the battle was already here. The swarm had advanced faster than expected. Orbital platforms around Veth Prime were shattered wreckage. Evacuation shuttles were being hunted down by swarm fighters. The surface of the planet was burning, cities reduced to ash, oceans boiling from the bombardment. "There they are," Varn said, pointing at the tactical display. "The swarm's main force, at least 300 capital ships, thousands of fighters. We don't have enough." "We have enough," Margot interrupted. "Admiral Thorne, what's your assessment?" The human commander's voice came through the comms, calm and collected. "They're focused on the planet. They haven't seen us yet. We have the element of surprise." "How long until they notice?" "About 3 minutes," Thorne said, "so let's make them count." The human fleet split into 3 formations. The first, led by Margot's last stand, headed straight for the swarm's capital ships. The second, commanded by Thorne, moved to intercept the swarm fighters. The third, a reserve fleet of ancient cruisers and hastily repaired destroyers, positioned itself to protect the evacuation shuttles. Xylos watched the tactical display with a mixture of fear and awe. The human ships were ancient, their technology generations behind the swarm's biomechanical horrors, but they moved with a precision that shouldn't have been possible. "Captain," one of Margot's officers said, "the swarm is responding. They're deploying boarding craft." "Let them come," Margot said. "We've been waiting 2 centuries to kill something." The first wave of swarm fighters hit the human fleet like a hammer, but the humans didn't flinch. They fought with a ferocity that Xylos had never seen, ramming, boarding, self-destructing, sacrificing themselves without hesitation. Ship after ship detonated in brilliant flashes of light, taking swarm vessels with them. But the humans weren't dying. That was the thing that Xylos couldn't process. The human soldiers were already dead. They had died centuries ago. This second death was just a return to the silence they had left. On the last stand, Margot led the boarding actions personally. She stood on the bridge of the first swarm vessel, her pistol blazing, her voice screaming orders that echoed through the alien corridors. "Forward, don't stop. We don't need to survive, we just need to win." Xylos watched the battle unfold from the last stand's bridge. She saw human soldiers throw themselves into the teeth of the swarm, sacrificing themselves without a moment's hesitation. She saw ancient vessels detonate in proximity to swarm battleships, crippling them with shockwaves of debris. She saw the swarm's forces begin to falter. But she also saw the cost. The human fleet was being destroyed, not just damaged, destroyed. Hundreds of ships were reduced to scrap. Thousands of soldiers were returning to the silence from which they had been awakened. "Captain," Xylos said, "your forces are taking heavy losses. You need to withdraw." Margot's voice came through the comms, crackling with interference. "Withdraw? Commander, we just got here. We haven't even started yet." "But your ships?" "Our ships are irrelevant," Margot said. "We are the Resurrection Corps. We are the dead. And we are going to win this war, or we are going to die trying. Again." Xylos stared at the tactical display. The human fleet was being decimated, but they were taking the swarm with them. Capital ship after capital ship exploded under the relentless assault. Fighter squadrons were torn apart by human pilots who had no fear of death. And then something happened that Xylos never expected. The swarm's primary warship, a massive biomechanical monstrosity that dwarfed the largest human vessels, began to retreat. "They're pulling back," Varn said. "The swarm is retreating." Xylos watched as the swarm ships disengaged, fleeing into the darkness of space. They left behind thousands of dead, millions of tons of wreckage, and a burning planet that had almost been consumed. But they didn't leave entirely. They pulled back to the outer reaches of the system, regrouping, preparing for a counterattack. "They'll be back," Margot said. "They always come back." Xylos nodded. She knew. She had seen it before. But for now, they had won. The Veth was still alive. The planet was still there. And the Resurrection Corps had proven that the dead were not to be trifled with. Margot limped onto the bridge, her scarred face streaked with alien blood and human sweat. She looked exhausted, hollowed out, running on fumes. "How many ships did we lose?" she asked. 63%, an officer reported. "At least 3,000 soldiers have been deactivated." Margot nodded. "So we're down to 37%. That's fine. We don't need many." Xylos grabbed Margot's arm. "Captain." "Commander, don't," Margot said. "Don't thank me. Don't tell me I did the right thing. I know what I did. I did it because I had to, and I'd do it again." Xylos released her. "You saved us. Your people saved us. You have no idea what that means." Margot smiled. It was a tired smile, worn down by centuries of silence and the weight of a duty that had never ended. "I know exactly what it means, Commander. It means someone remembered us. Someone thought we were worth waking up for," she nodded. "And that's enough." The fleet regrouped. The dead counted their losses, and the survivors prepared for the swarm's inevitable return. But something had changed in the galaxy. The Veth had seen the humans fight. They had seen the dead rise to battle. And they knew that Earth's promise was real. Humanity didn't just mourn its dead. It deployed them. The battle that changed everything. The silence after the first engagement was deceptive. Xylos stood on the observation deck of the last stand, watching the burned and broken remains of the human fleet drift in the void. The ships that had survived the battle were scattered, many of them barely operational, their systems straining to keep their resurrected crews alive. But they were still fighting, still waiting, still ready. "The swarm is regrouping," Varn reported, his voice hollow. "They've called in reinforcements from neighboring systems. Estimates suggest they'll have tripled their previous numbers within the next 48 hours. Xylos felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The human fleet had barely survived the first engagement. If the swarm returned with 3 times the force, there was no chance. "We can't sustain another battle like that," she said. "The human forces are depleted. Their ships are shattered. We need to evacuate the remaining civilians and flee." "No." The voice came from behind her. Xylos turned to see Margot Sorensen standing in the doorway, her scarred face illuminated by the harsh glare of emergency lighting. She looked worse than she had before, hollow-eyed, pale, the resurrection process taking its toll on her ancient body. "We're not running," Margot said. "We made a promise. We're staying." Xylos shook her head. "Captain, you don't understand the swarm." "I understand better than you think," Margot interrupted. "I've fought monsters before. I've watched civilizations burn. I've seen hope die in the eyes of people who had nothing left. And I know that the only way to win against an enemy like the swarm is to make them believe that you're not afraid." Xylos stared at her. "And you're not afraid?" Margot's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Commander, I've been dead for 200 years. Fear is a luxury I can't afford anymore." The swarm's counterattack came exactly as predicted. 48 hours after the first engagement, the alien fleet returned, 3 times larger than before, their biomechanical forms bristling with weapons and armor. They moved with terrible purpose, their goal clear: the complete annihilation of Veth Prime and everyone who defended it. Xylos watched the tactical display with a sinking heart. The human fleet had been reinforced, but barely. A few dozen ships had limped in from the graveyard, their crews awakened from the dead, their systems barely operational. "We're outnumbered 10-1, Varn said. "We have no chance." "Chance is irrelevant," Margot said. "The only thing that matters is fighting." The swarm attacked. The battle that followed was unlike anything Xylos had ever witnessed. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like demons. They rammed their ships into swarm vessels, detonating their reactors in suicide attacks. They boarded enemy ships with abandon, fighting hand-to-hand against creatures that had no concept of fear or mercy. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They didn't stop. Xylos watched from the bridge of the last stand as human ship after human ship exploded, taking swarm vessels with them. She saw Margot lead a boarding party onto a swarm capital ship, fighting through corridors of poolsing, alien flesh with a ferocity that was almost inhuman. And then she saw something that shattered her understanding of the universe. The swarm's central command vessel, a massive pulsating mass of metal and flesh, began to retreat. "The swarm is pulling back," Varn shouted. "There." "Don't celebrate yet," Margot's voice crackled over the comms. "They're not retreating, they're regrouping, they'll be back." And she was right. The swarm retreated to the outer system, but they didn't leave. They circled, waited, probed. They were learning, adapting, finding new ways to attack. "They're changing their tactics," Margot said, her voice strained. "They're not just throwing themselves at us anymore. They're using strategy. They're figuring out our weaknesses." Xylos felt a chill run down her spine. "What are our weaknesses?" Margot was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Everything. We're dead, Commander. We're running on borrowed time. And eventually, the swarm will find the one thing we can't survive." She paused. "Us." The next attack came from an unexpected direction. The swarm didn't target the human ships. They targeted the Veth, the living, breathing Veth who were still trying to evacuate their world. They sent waves of boarding craft, designed to capture and consume, not destroy. "They're taking prisoners," Xylos realized with horror. "They're using our people as hostages." Margot's face appeared on the bridge display. She looked exhausted, her scarred face streaked with blood, her eyes burning with anger. "Commander, I need you to do something for me," she said. "I need you to trust me." Xylos hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Margot's smile was grim. "I'm going to do what the dead do best. I'm going to show them that there are worse things than dying." She cut the connection. Xylos watched as the last stand detached from the human fleet and headed straight for the swarm's boarding craft. The ancient cruiser was battered, barely operational, its weapons systems almost depleted. But it moved with purpose. "What is she doing?" Varn whispered. "Something insane," Xylos said. "Something that's going to get her killed." The last stand crashed into the swarm's largest boarding craft, tearing through its hull like a knife through flesh. The impact was catastrophic. Both vessels were reduced to debris, their crews scattered into the void. But in the chaos, something remarkable happened. The swarm's boarding craft began to disengage. They pulled back, retreating from the Veth vessels, breaking off their attacks. "She did it," Xylos breathed. "She stopped them." Margot's voice crackled over the comms, barely audible through the static. "Commander, I don't have much time. The last stand is gone, but I managed to damage their communication systems. They're blind, deaf, and confused. You have a window, take it." Xylos stared at the display. "Captain, you have to get out of there, you have to." "I told you, Commander, I'm dead. I've been dead for a long time. This is just..." Returning to the silence, a pause. "But I'm proud of what we did. We fought for something worth fighting for, and that's more than I ever expected." The connection went dark. Xylos watched the debris field where the last stand had once been. Tears streaked down her face, hot and bitter. "Commander," Varn said, his voice trembling. "We have to go. The swarm is regrouping. We need to use the window she gave us." Xylos nodded, wiping her eyes. Set course for the evacuation zone. Get every civilian off that planet. She looked at the human fleet, the scattered remnants of ships that had risen from the dead to fight for strangers. They were battered, broken, diminished, but they had done what no other civilization had dared to do. They had answered the call. They had kept their promise. And they had proven that humanity's dead were not to be trifled with. The horror of mercy. The evacuation took 9 hours. Xylos stood on the bridge of the Veth command ship, watching the last civilian transports jump to safety. The human fleet, or what remained of it, stood guard, their shattered hulls gleaming in the light of Veth Prime's dying sun. The swarm had retreated, but they hadn't gone far. They were still out there, waiting, watching. They knew that the humans were weakening. And they knew that eventually they would win. "What happens now?" Varn asked. "We've lost half our fleet, the humans are almost gone, we can't." "We can," Xylos interrupted. "We have to. The humans made a promise to us. We owe it to them to keep fighting." "But Commander, we—" A new voice cut through the comms, familiar, ancient, full of exhaustion. "Commander Xylos, this is Admiral Thorn." Xylos felt her heart leap. "Admiral, you survived." "I survived," Thorn said. "Barely, my ship is a wreck, my crew is decimated, but I'm here." A pause. "We need to talk." Xylos ordered a shuttle prepared. Within minutes, she was aboard the human flagship, a battered dreadnought that had seen better centuries. The corridors were filled with wounded soldiers, their faces pale, their bodies broken. She found Admiral Thorn in the medical bay. He was old, older than any human she had ever seen, his face lined with wrinkles, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. But there was a fire in him that hadn't faded, a determination that refused to die. "You came to ask why," Thorn said. "Why we're doing this, why we won't stop." Xylos nodded. "I need to understand. I need to know why you would sacrifice everything for strangers." Thorn smiled. It was a tired smile, worn down by centuries of duty. "Because we know what it's like to be alone, Commander. We know what it's like to face extinction and have no one answer the call. We promised ourselves that we would never let that happen to anyone else. But your soldiers are dying. Your ships are destroyed. You can't keep fighting forever." "We don't need to," Thorn said. "We just need to fight long enough for you to survive, and then we can rest." Xylos shook her head. "Admiral, this is madness. You're sacrificing thousands of lives for a world that isn't even your own. You could have stayed in the graveyard. You could have ignored our plea. Why didn't you?" Thorn's expression softened. "Because that's what it means to be human, Commander. We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for each other. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And sometimes we fight for those who remind us of what we lost." He paused, his eyes distant. "Humanity has made many mistakes. We've caused suffering. We've been cruel, but we've also been kind. We've sacrificed. We've loved. And we've promised that no matter how dark the galaxy gets, we will never turn our backs on someone who needs us." Xylos felt tears well in her eyes. "But your people are dying. You're losing." Thorn's smile turned grim. "Commander, my people have been dead for centuries. The soldiers you see fighting, they're not living. They're echoes, fragments of who they used to be. And we're all willing to give up those echoes to make sure that the universe doesn't forget who we were." He reached out and placed a hand on Xylos' shoulder. "You asked why we're doing this. The answer is simple. Because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. We believe that even in the darkest moments there is hope. And we believe that helping you is worth any cost." Xylos understood. She understood what he was saying, that the human resurrection corps was more than an army. It was a philosophy, a belief that even in death there was purpose. "Admiral," she said, "what will happen to your soldiers when the war is over?" Thorn looked away. "Most of them will return to the silence. Their bodies will fail. Their minds will fade. But they will do so knowing that they died for something that mattered." "And you?" Thorn's eyes met hers. "I'll be with them. I was dead once, Commander. I'll be dead again, and I'm at peace with that." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden burst of static. Varn's voice crackled over the comms, filled with urgency. "Commander, the swarm is attacking again. They're sending everything they have at the evacuation zone. The human fleet they're being overwhelmed." Xylos and Thorn rushed to the bridge. The tactical display showed the swarm's forces swarming toward the remains of the human fleet, their numbers overwhelming. "We have to do something," Xylos said. "We can't let them." Thorn put a hand on her arm. "Commander, there's nothing you can do. The humans will make a stand. That's what we do." "But—" "Trust me," Thorn said. "I've done this before. I know how it ends." The human fleet made their stand. Ship after ship sacrificed themselves, buying time for the Veth evacuation. Soldiers threw themselves into the teeth of the swarm, fighting with a desperation that was almost poetic. And in the end, they held the line. The swarm retreated, their forces decimated. The Veth evacuated their people. The planet burned, but the species survived. And the human resurrection corps, what remained of them, drifted in the void, waiting for a new war, a new cause, a new reason to wake from the silence. Xylos watched them go. She knew that she would never forget what she had seen. She had witnessed the horror of mercy. She had seen the dead rise to fight for strangers. And she knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The swarm's counterattack. The silence between battles was the worst part. Xylos had never known such quiet. Veth Prime was a graveyard of burned cities and shattered dreams. The surviving civilians were huddled in temporary shelters, their faces hollow with grief and exhaustion. But the humans were worse. Admiral Thorn stood on the observation deck of his damaged flagship, staring out at the stars. He was barely recognizable, his face gaunt, his body covered in wounds that refused to heal, his ancient eyes filled with a sorrow that Xylos couldn't begin to understand. "We can't hold them forever," he said. "The swarm is adapting. Every time we fight them, they learn, they change. They find new ways to kill us." Xylos walked up beside him. "Then what do we do? What do we do when there's nothing left to fight?" Thorn turned to her. "We find a way to survive. That's what humans do. We survive. We adapt. We find a way to keep going, even when everything says we should give up." "But your soldiers—" "My soldiers are dead, Commander. They've been dead for a long time, and they're tired. So am I." The swarm's counterattack came with no warning. One moment, the system was quiet. The next, the tactical display exploded with red icons. Thousands of swarm ships emerged from quantum space, their biomechanical forms bristling with weapons. They knew, Xylos realized. They knew we were regrouping. They knew we were vulnerable. "They've been waiting," Thorn agreed. "Waiting for us to make a mistake, waiting for us to show weakness." The human fleet scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The swarm ships overwhelmed them, crippling the ancient vessels with concentrated fire. The last stand, Margot's old ship, exploded in a brilliant flash, taking her memory with it. Admiral Thorn watched the battle from his flagship. His face was unreadable, but Xylos could see the weight of command pressing down on him. "We have to do something," she said. "We can't lose this battle." Thorn nodded. "I know. That's why I'm going to give them what they want." Xylos stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to surrender." The word hung in the air like a curse. Xylos shook her head, unable to process what she had just heard. "Admiral, you can't. Your people." "My people are already dead, Commander. I'm tired. They're tired. And if we keep fighting, we'll just burn out the last few embers of hope we have left." He turned to face her fully. "I'm going to send a message to the swarm. I'm going to tell them that we'll give them what they want, the Veth, our ships, everything, if they let the humans go. That's the only way to save my soldiers." Xylos grabbed his arm. You can't betray us. We trusted you." "And I trusted you to be worth the cost," Thorn said. "But the cost is too high. My soldiers deserve to rest. They don't deserve to fight a battle they can't win." The message was sent. Xylos watched as the swarm responded. A single transmission filled with hate and hunger. They agreed. They would take the Veth and leave the humans alone. And Thorn prepared to honor the deal. But Xylos couldn't let it happen. She had seen too much. She had lost too many. She made a decision. "Admiral Thorn," she said, "I'm sorry, but I can't let you do this. I can't let you betray my people." Thorn turned to her. "Commander." "You don't understand," Xylos interrupted. "My people didn't just ask for help. We offered something in return, something you don't know about." Thorn frowned. "What are you talking about?" Xylos took a deep breath. "Before you arrived, we sent a message to every Veth colony in the galaxy. We told them to hide, to scatter, to survive. But we also told them that if we failed, they should send everything they had, every ship, every soldier, every resource to the humans, to Earth." Thorn stared at her. "You what?" "Because we knew that if we couldn't survive, you could. You have something the swarm fears. You have something the galaxy needs. You have the promise of resurrection." Thorn was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Commander Xylos, you are either the bravest or the most foolish person I have ever met." Xylos smiled back, "Probably both." The message was sent to the human forces, a final transmission that changed everything. "All human vessels, this is Commander Xylos of the Veth Defense Fleet. The Veth offer you everything we have, our ships, our weapons, our colonies. We give them to you freely in the hopes that you will use them to save the galaxy. This is not a surrender. This is a gift. Use it wisely." The human fleet paused. They looked at the offer. They looked at their dying comrades. And then they made a decision. "We accept," Thorn said, "and we offer you something in return." Xylos blinked. "What?" "Our word," Thorn said, "that we will never stop fighting, that we will never give up, that we will carry your legacy forward even when we are gone." The human fleet didn't surrender. They rallied, they regrouped, they found new purpose. And in that moment, Xylos realized what she had truly done. She hadn't just saved the Veth. She had created an alliance that would shake the galaxy to its core. The living and the dead, standing together. The legacy of Ghost. The final battle was the most destructive conflict in Veth history. The swarm threw everything they had at the Human-Veth Alliance, thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, a relentless tide of metal and flesh that seemed impossible to stop. But the humans didn't stop. And neither did the Veth. Xylos stood on the bridge of the Veth command ship, watching the battle unfold. The human fleet was smaller than it had been, but it was more determined. The soldiers who remained fought with a ferocity that inspired even the most terrified Veth. "Commander," Varn said, "the swarm is breaking through the defensive line. They're heading straight for the evacuation shuttles." Xylos' heart sank. "How many shuttles are left?" 23. "They're making a run for the jump point, but they won't make it in time." Xylos looked at the tactical display. The swarm ships were swarming toward the shuttles, their weapons blazing. And then something happened that made her breath catch. The human fleet changed course. Every remaining vessel turned toward the swarm's advance. They moved with a purpose that was almost suicidal, ramming, blasting, sacrificing themselves to slow the swarm's advance. "No," Xylos whispered, "they can't." "They can," Thorn's voice crackled over the comms. "And they will. We made a promise, Commander. We are keeping it." Xylos watched as the human ships crashed into the swarm. Ship after ship exploded, taking swarm vessels with them. The evacuation shuttles slipped past the chaos, jumping to safety. But the cost was horrific. "Admiral," Xylos said, "your fleet." "Our fleet is gone," Thorn said. "We knew this would happen, we knew the cost, and we accepted it." The swarm retreated, not because they had won, but because they had lost too many ships, too many soldiers, too much momentum. The Human-Veth Alliance had broken their will to fight. For now, the survivors gathered on Veth Prime's surface. The planet was a scarred wasteland, but life had survived. The Veth were alive. The humans were alive, those who had lived through the battle at least. Admiral Thorne stood among the ruins, his ancient body barely holding together. He was surrounded by the remnants of his fleet, soldiers who had been resurrected for this one purpose. "We did it," he said. "We saved them." Xylos walked up to him. She was still in shock, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. "Admiral," she said, "what happens now? What happens to your soldiers?" Thorne smiled. "We rest. We've been fighting for centuries. We've earned a break. But what if the swarm returns? What if someone else needs help?" Thorne's expression grew serious. "Then we will wake again. We will be ready. We will answer the call." He paused, looking up at the stars. "You see, Commander, that's what humanity does. We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for everyone who needs us, and we never forget the promises we make." Xylos nodded. She understood. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I'll wait," Thorne said. "I'll wait for the next time someone cries for help, and I'll answer. That's what we do. That's what we are." The human fleet, what remained of it, began to leave. They drifted toward the graveyard, toward the cold silence of space, toward the rest that had been denied them for so long. Xylos watched them go, her heart heavy with gratitude and sorrow. She had come to Earth asking for help. She had received the impossible. She had witnessed the dead rise to fight for strangers. And she knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The Human Resurrection Corps had shown the universe what it meant to be human. They had shown that even in death, there was purpose. That even in the darkest moments, there was hope. That even when everything seemed lost, there was always someone willing to answer the call. The dead had risen, and they had kept their promise. The end.